Madí is a language spoken by somewhere between 500 and 1,000 people in the Brazilian state of Amazonas, around 260 kilometers north of the Bolivian border. The three tribes who speak the language live north of the Purus River, which eventually feeds into the Amazon. The language has three varieties, each spoken by a different tribe. These are the Banawa, the Jamamadi, and the Jarawa. The three varieties are about 95% similar, and speakers of one can easily understand speakers of the others. For this reason, linguists consider them to be dialects of the same language, although natives view them as three separate languages. Knowledge of the tribal language is considered very important to tribal membership. The most well-documented of the varieties is Jarawa, which is the form this video will be focusing on. In writing this video, I've made good use of R.M.W. Dixon's Grammar of the Language, along with several other works, including SIL International's 2007 report, which I've linked to in the description. The Jarawara dialect has 19 or 20 phonemes in total, of which 11 or 12 are consonants, depending on the phonemic status of the glottal stop. It features a very unusual distribution of stops, where voicing is not distinguished, but different sounds can be either voiced or voiceless in their basic forms. In Banawa and Jamamadi, there's a voicing distinction made in alveolar stops, but in Jarawa this has been neutralised. The consonants are m, n, t, k, b, g, f, s, h, r, w. T and k have voiced allophones which sometimes occur word initially, and b is occasionally devoiced word medially. The palatal stop is commonly pronounced as an approximant, but always uses its stop pronunciation next to e. The glottal fricative is nasal, and, along with the other two nasal sounds, nasalizes all neighbouring vowels. This fricative can sometimes be dropped between vowels when unstressed, in which case vowels often combine. Between an e and an a yod is added. In Jarawara, a is usually pronounced as a slightly velarized lateral, except next to e. In other dialects, the tapped realization is more common. The glottal stop is quite limited in its use, and perhaps it doesn't even count as a phoneme. It occurs when two words are joined into a compound, or in reduplication, if either of these situations would cause two vowels to come into contact. The 8 vowels are e, u, a, a. This system is notable for having no rounded vowels, which is rather rare cross-linguistically. The back vowel is usually close mid, but can occur as close at the end of a word and after k. As mentioned, vowels are nasalized next to nasal consonants, but nasalization also occurs on the last vowel of a sentence. This vowel also receives rising intonation. On the topic of intonation, an important concept in Madí is that of the mora. A mora is a unit of timing equivalent to the duration of one vowel. Initial consonants don't contribute towards the mora, but each written vowel does, meaning that long vowels count as 2 moras. All words must contain at least 2 moras, so monosyllabic words always contain long vowels. Stress is assigned first to the penultimate mora, and then working backwards to every alternate mora. The syllable structure of the language is CV, so syllables can optionally begin with a consonant, and must end in a vowel. The language contains many loanwords from Portuguese, as well as a few from other native languages. These are adapted to the constraints of the language, so sounds will change and vowels are often added. Given that Portuguese spelling isn't always transparent, Some of these may also appear closer in speech than in writing. Madí nouns can either be feminine or masculine. All nouns have a gender, and it's not always obvious what a noun's gender is. Gender isn't shown on the noun itself, but is shown on other elements in a sentence. Unlike in most European languages, the default gender in Madí is feminine, so if discussing something of unknown grammatical gender, feminine marking is used. Nouns can also be either free or possessed. There are only so many possessed nouns, and very few processes can make new ones. They denote parts and features of free nouns, or signify association or quantification. Possessed nouns inflect to agree with their head-free noun, although many also have an additional form, so that they can be used as independent free nouns. Possession can be either alienable or inalienable. That is, the language uses different structures depending on whether the possessed noun can be separated from the possessor, or is an intrinsic part of it. The main way it shows this is through the possessive particle ga. This particle is placed between the possessor and the possessee, but only for alienable possession, where the possessee is not part of the possessor. Inalienable possession doesn't use this, and just places the nouns next to one another. A couple of pronouns have special forms for combining with the particle. Kinship terms have a special role in the language. They're somewhere between alienable and inalienable, although different words behave slightly differently. Each kinship term also has a different form depending on the possessor, so your son uses a different word for son than her son. Nouns don't take much more marking, although there is an accusative suffix which isn't found in Jarawara except in some older speakers' speech, and a contrastive particle, da. Madí only has a small number of true adjectives. These can be used predicatively or attributively, but most do not inflect for gender, with the exception of 2. Where an adjective doesn't exist, speakers may use either a verb or a construction with a noun. Madí verbs are much more complicated than nouns. Only about a third of verb roots are able to inflect. The rest require use of an auxiliary, which takes the inflection in their stead. The class of inflecting verbs is closed. No newly created verbs will behave in this way. There are 2 auxiliaries for the verbs which require them. Of these, most verbs use na, while others use ha. The rules for which a verb uses are a little complex, but in general, na is used for actions, while ha is used for states. There are 3 slots for prefixes on verbs, where only one prefix may occur in each slot. The first of these may contain the pronominal subject prefixes, the third person prefix, or the away prefix. Let's go through them in that order. There are 2 prefixes to mark the verb's subject. These show the first person singular and the second person singular. Note that no other subjects have dedicated prefixes on verbs. However, the second option for this slot is the third person prefix, which is used when both the subject and the object of a verb are third person, whether they're nouns or pronouns, and when the object is the focus of the sentence. The second prefix slot belongs to the applicative. This is a prefix with a few different uses, such as increasing a verb's valency in a different way to the causative. It also has a number of uses which involve changing the semantics of either the verb or one of its arguments, although these uses depend on the verb and the general context of the sentence. When the applicative is used to increase valency, it promotes an intransitive experiencer to the transitive subject, but the third prefix slot is the causative, which instead promotes the experiencer to the transitive object. The causative has 2 main forms. when used on an inflecting verb root, it's pronounced na. But when used on an auxiliary, or the verb ha, it's pronounced niha. It also causes the auxiliary itself to be dropped, so prefixes and suffixes are concatenated directly onto one another. In addition to this, there are a number of verbs and morphophonemic situations where either part of the causative prefix or the verb stem are elided, but I won't go into those here. So that's it for the prefixes. These are added onto the verb root or auxiliary, which may then have suffixes added, although all suffixes are optional. Suffixes are by far the most complex part of the language, so I'll try only to mention the most important points, but they do need mentioning. The first set are what Dixon calls the miscellaneous suffixes. There are just fewer than 60 of these, and they can describe everything from the manner or time when the verb is completed to the state of the participants. They often interact with auxiliaries in various ways, and certain prefixes either attach straight onto the stem, require an additional auxiliary, or require all additional suffixes to be added onto another auxiliary. This depends on the suffix and can get quite complex, with up to 3 or 4 auxiliaries in the same clause. Some suffixes even steal prefixes from the main inflecting verb to add to their own auxiliary. Dixon splits these into 6 echelons, describing their exact interactions with other verbal elements. Notably, the negative suffix often occurs in this slot, though certain combinations of affixes can cause it to move to other parts of the verbal complex. This is one of the only negators in the language, so is used very frequently. The next set of suffixes expresses tense and modality. 6 suffixes are used to express the past tenses. A distinction is made between immediate, recent and distant past, depending on how long ago the past event happened. These suffixes also show evidentiality, that is, how the speaker knows the event happened. A different tense suffix is used depending on whether the speaker witnessed the event or not. All tense mode suffixes also inflect for gender, but I'll be covering that later, so I've left them in the unmarked feminine for now. In addition to its regular use, the immediate past non-eyewitness suffix can be used as a mirative to express surprise, and the other evidentials can all be used for other purposes, such as to express purposefulness. In the same slot as the past tense suffixes can be 5 modal suffixes: the future, the intentional, the irrealis, the hypothetical and the reportative. These do not show evidentiality. The future is used to refer to something which is yet to happen, or was yet to happen at a stated time. The intentional is used to show intent or desire to do something. The irrealis is used to express possible or likely events that haven't happened or that won't. It can express conditionals, subjunctives, potentials or obligation, so long as the event actually happening is outside current reality. The hypothetical is generally used as a conditional. It's rather rare and only occurs in a dependent clause, where the main clause uses the irrealis. Finally, the reportative is a form of independent evidential suffix. It's used when the speaker has heard something from someone else. This particular suffix is a little unusual, and can also be added to noun phrases to refer to things the speaker has only heard of from others. The next slot may contain a pronoun. This forms an independent word, but is still counted as part of the verbal structure, because it takes additional suffixes which modify the meaning of the verb. The pronouns that appear here can cross-reference the subject, the object, or another noun phrase in the same or another clause. However, the form of this pronoun will always be the same as the second position pronoun, so maybe like the pronoun prefixes we saw earlier. Next, we may have a secondary verb. There are 2 of these, which add different meanings to the main verb. The first shows an extended, lasting event, while the second shows something to be apparent or supposed by the speaker. These occur as separate words and don't take prefixes, but can take suffixes, and often do, as there are still verbal suffixes yet to come. Aside from a few markers which can be moved for various complex reasons, the final slot is for mood suffixes. This is the most frequently occurring group of suffixes on the verb. There are three main moods, as well as a handful of miscellaneous modal and non-modal suffixes. The indicative mood is shown through two suffixes, the declarative and the backgrounding suffix. The declarative is used for new or salient information, while the backgrounding suffix is used for less important information or information not central to the topic of the conversation. In Jarawara, the declarative suffix is the most common, but other dialects use them to different degrees. There are three suffixes for the interrogative mood. These are the content interrogative, the polar, and the polar future. The content interrogative is used when asking for a specific piece of information. It's paired with a question word, such as who, what, or where. Some of these question words are noun-like, and some are verb-like. There are also two polar interrogative suffixes. These are used to ask yes-no questions, and are accompanied by a distinctive rising and falling intonation pattern. One of these suffixes is the polar future suffix, which combines modal and tense marking. This is not double marked with the normal future suffix, but is actually placed in the tense modal slot, despite being classed as a mood suffix. The four imperative suffixes show all four possibilities of positive and negative polarity and immediate and distal, which combine marking of tense and location. The immediate form is used for instructing someone to do something here and now, whereas the distal is used for telling someone to do something either elsewhere or at a future point in time. The other mood type suffixes are the counterfactual, used for expressing something the speaker falsely believed to be true, the contrast suffix, for showing one thing to be true as opposed to another, the immediate, for talking about something happening straight away, the unusual suffix, for things that are abnormal, unexpected, or which are not the speaker's fault, and finally the contrastive negation suffix, for things that are not true, in contrast to something which is. Some of these suffixes aren't truly mood suffixes, and may take different positions within the predicate to proper mood markers. The final feature of verbs is reduplication. Only verbs undergo reduplication in Madí. However, it can be used to derive free nouns from verb roots. Reduplication also has other functions in the language, such as marking iterativity and intensity. In general, an initial single-syllable reduplication adds the meaning of a bit, an initial double-syllable reduplication adds the meaning a lot, and a final single reduplication describes a multiplicity of an action's participants. Where an auxiliary occurs in a reduplicated complex, it will be na. However, iterative reduplication uses ha, along with an initial single reduplication. This often carries a repetitive, habitual or frequentative meaning. I've already touched on gender agreement in this video, so let's look in a little more detail. There are two main areas which mark gender in Madí. These are possessed nouns and verbs. Possessed nouns have two different forms, depending on whether their possessor is feminine or masculine. These forms may only differ by a word final vowel change, or other vowels within the stem may change. For some possessed nouns, the masculine and feminine forms are the same, giving the appearance that they don't inflect. Two adjectives also mark gender, in which case they behave much like possessed nouns, although the majority are unchanging. a number of verbal elements mark for gender too. Inflecting verbs, auxiliaries and miscellaneous suffixes will inflect when word final, while tense and mood suffixes will inflect in any position. Each element has to be taken on its own here, as there are several suffixes which have rather unusual forms between the two genders, but most use simple vowel alternations. When this happens, the suffixes can be grouped into one of two areas, which show completely opposite patterns. Generally, suffixes later on in the verbal complex show area 2 marking, while those earlier on show area 1 marking. Which argument of the verb is agreed with in gender is down to what type of construction it is. With a copula, the copular subject is agreed with. With an intransitive verb, it's the experiencer. Affixes on transitive verbs can agree with either the subject or the object. The choice is made depending on which is the main topic of discussion. This will usually be a noun phrase which is referenced in a number of clauses. Generally, verbs will agree with their subject. However, if the object is the topic, then under very certain conditions the verb will agree with this instead. Madí pronouns show number, person, animacy, possession, clusivity and a form of case. Third person inanimate pronouns don't vary with number, and are mostly zero in form. Animacy is only shown in the third person, and clusivity only in the first. The form of a pronoun isn't strictly based on case, but on the position relative to the verb. In general, this corresponds to a subject-object distinction, as I've written here, but the post-verbal pronouns always take the subject form, regardless of what they reference. The third-person plural pronoun is identical in form and very similar in meaning to what's known as the augment modifier. This is used to pluralise a free noun. It occurs after a free noun, but never a possessed noun, in either the subject or object positions of a sentence, and is part of the noun phrase structure. Instead of prepositions like in English, Madí uses postpositions, where the word comes after the noun. Whereas English has many prepositions, Madí has only a few. In most situations, speakers will use the word ja, which can correspond to most of the basic English prepositions, and context is used to determine meaning. However, there are also a few others which have more specific meanings, generally non-locational. The normal order of the subject, object and verb in Madí is not as important as it is in English. However, there are conventions in the ordering. The verb will always occur last, excluding the various elements of the larger predicate which have to come after it. The order of the subject and object is fairly free, and depends on what the speaker wishes to emphasise, but in general the topic of conversation will occur first, and background information second. There's a slight preference for placing the subject first, regardless of the topic, but this is marginal, and there's still considerable freedom for the speaker to choose the ordering they like. If both the subject and object are pronouns, an order of OSV is observed, which, if taken to be the default, is the rarest ordering, shared with less than 1% of other languages. Possessed nouns and adjectives always occur after nouns, as do postpositions. Possessors of nominals precede their possessees, regardless of whether this is a possessed noun, free noun, or nominalised verb. Wanaku, apa, giku, sire, isi, maka, sumi, yume, uma, lafi, afune, afu, ame, emene, ama, apate, epete, done, donna, dati, data, yehe, mani, manu, dame, deme, namiti, ini, inu, mawa, sawa, suki, defu, ami, api, utu, dao, jibute, guma, aki, iti, naki, wapu, sami, walana, moe, seseya, babu, kimi, hasuka, buru, malakusa, jifari, uhari, fama, fama uharimake, fama, yehegahari, yehegahari uharimake, yehegahari famamake, yehegahari fama uharimake, yehegahari famamake, yehegafama, awe, ewene, awa, winika, buka, sirika, pasyupa, fale, umi, buku, siru, kusi, jimawa, iha, daukana, ditisa, wati, gatusi, kalabuha, sarehe, yatika, yayai, isu, amusa, guma, fimi, yawa, hiwa, hanu, inu, hata, ipana, muwa, ayaka, dafa, bana, geye, nika, getebe, aka, buka, detesene, danaku, dafu, gita, ma, dai, hawa, siri, atapu, bisa, tira, busa, yana, ati, sele, nuki, bete, da, lawi, sirihine, tirin, imawa yofiti kanahi owania, hikabahi itala, to wisawa o hahabana o ke, o tanima wa hati me ni neke, hinakiti ha hapakano, samira, amo o pisapa owa o wina o ke, o kupiara me hipanametika, hifimiti, oke boto feyo ya, o wahaha kane hirika, ala ati timitahi, okobise wini yapuka, himata ihi o yehe koma ori. Ariku hinofake, ota ayaki hawadoha, pote ama uke, fara o wahriha,